Welcome back, guys, to the next episode in this installment of Nathaniel Ahart and Company's Top 100 Albums. And with me today, I have my very good friend, Mr. Harrison Mark. It's great to see you, man.
Hi, Nathaniel. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, yeah. So this episode, we're going over numbers 50 through 26. And so before we get into it, obviously, I have to ask you, as I do with all my guests, what are you thinking of the list so far? Like, what has stood out to you? What are your overall impressions of the picks on this list?
So I was kind of talking to you before about this, but I was pretty happy with some of the selections that made it. Like as you know, I'm a big Leonard Cohen fan. I really like his stuff, his abilities as a songwriter. So I was happy to see his albums make it. I enjoy Neutral Milk Hotel. I'm glad to see that was there. But overall, there were some surprises, but I think it's a pretty solid list so far.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I'm glad you feel that way, man. And there was something else you were mentioning to me that kind of surprised you.
Excuse me.
Or maybe not. I'm not sure.
About the list so far, let me think. I mentioned Animals, which I was glad to see there.
Mm-hmm.
I know you mentioned the Calvin Harris thing, which let's not say anything about. But overall, I don't know. I think it's a pretty good list.
Yeah, no, it's a good mix, I think, so far with everything you guys picked. And so I mean, I'll tell you, I can't wait to get into today's episode, because this is we're getting into really, really classic territory today.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Obviously not everything on here is going to be like, an absolute masterpiece, but I think for the most part, you look at these albums and it's hard to argue their iconography and all that sort of stuff. So let's get into this list here.
All right, let's do it.
And now we are starting with number 50, which is Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks. Guys, this album should be higher. I'm telling you, this, I think, is the best thing Dylan has ever done. I think this is Dylan's greatest album. Literally, you start the album with Tangled Up in Blue, which, I mean, come on, it's just an all-time classic. I mean, there's no denying how wonderful that song is. And on top of that, you have like so many lyrical masterpieces, especially Idiot Wind. You have Shelter from the Storm, which is so iconic and used incredibly well at the end of Jerry Maguire and at the end of Steve Jobs from a few years ago. So, you have all these amazing songs and kind of how Dylan was, he said it wasn't about his divorce, but I think it's pretty obvious it was about his divorce. And so the best divorce album of all time, no question. But I think while some of the songs here, it isn't Dylan's absolute best songwriting, I think there's no question that it's his most consistent album from top to bottom. And just, it really does have that running theme of this really vitriolic sense of anger targeted at his wife at the time, Sarah. And but then you have songs like Jack Rosemary or Lily Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts, which is just in this incredibly that song proves how great Dylan is as a storyteller. I mean, really, there's hard for anybody to top him. I mean, he arguably the greatest songwriter of all time, as I've said many times in this series already, but just so many great songs. And obviously I think this is probably Dylan at his peak vocally. I mean, when people say Dylan isn't a great singer, I say, listen to this album or Desire, because he is like really pouring his soul into this album, especially when you listen to You're a Big Girl Now. He's just doing this howl and just right at the top of his register. It feels so controlled. It feels so emotive. This album is just absolutely incredible. One of the best folk rock albums of all time. One of the best singer-songwriter albums of all time. Did you have anything to say about this, Harris?
Oh, thank you, Nathaniel. Well, while I will say that I have not listened to as much of Bob Dylan as I would have liked, from what I have heard of him, like going back to what you're saying about people like dissing his vocals, I would say that he is definitely the right person to be singing the songs that he sings. Like just the amount of, you could tell that he's singing from the place like inside of him where he wrote these songs. Like you're not calling him the greatest songwriter ever for no reason. Like he definitely pulls this from somewhere deep, and you can tell in the way he sings it. This particular album I haven't listened to, unfortunately. I have heard Tangled Up in Blue, of course. And I'm pretty sure I've heard a couple of these before. Like I said, I'm not the biggest Bob Dylan listener. I definitely want to change that, but I would say from what I know of him that he definitely deserves multiple places on this list.
Absolutely. And this is his third album already. So saying
Wow.
a lot about Bob Dylan right there. So yeah, absolute classic, should be higher, but I'm glad to see it make the top 50 nonetheless. So Blood on the Tracks is number 50, and at number 49 we have A Love Supreme by John Coltrane, the first jazz album to make the list. I'm kind of surprised
Wow. Congratulations, jazz fans.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't anything earlier on, but obviously you can't go wrong. A lot of people regard this as John Coltrane's magnum opus. And while it isn't my favorite Coltrane album, I like jazz that's more consolidated, I guess, like songs that go on for around 4 to 7 minutes as opposed to like going on for 16 and whatnot. And maybe that's just a personal preference, because objectively that doesn't make the music worse, but when I'm listening to it, like I tend to find that stuff more memorable, the more hooky sort of jazz compositions. But really, I mean, this is such an incredible piece of tonal jazz. Really, I don't even know if you would call it modal jazz, but really this is Coltrane's love letter to God. And it's so incredible what he does, especially in part one, the acknowledgement, which is such a memorable track once you listen, and you get that little chance at the love supreme, a love supreme, just going over, and it's so memorable. But I mean, really, just it kind of it's him chronicling his spiritual journey with God through his saxophone, and it's just beautiful, especially when you get to the Psalm part 4 on the album. It's incredible once you realize that like what Coltrane is playing in that song. He wrote a poem to God, and then he didn't put the words on there, but he emoted them through his saxophone. And so you hear the inflections he's making with the sax. It's him speaking to God directly. And I just think that itself is like one of the most beautiful moments in music. No question about it. So have you listened to this, or have you listened to Coltrane or any jazz at all?
Unfortunately, I've never been much of a jazz guy. I have not heard anything by John Coltrane, although it sounds like I should. And
Yes.
I have massive respect for jazz as a genre, although I don't listen to it. I think that just the place it has in like the history of music, the history of American culture, the history of African American culture, I think is super essential to our culture today, our society. And it sounds like this album in particular, has a major part of that genre, from what you're saying.
No,
and from what I see.
It absolutely is like one of the most iconic jazz albums of all time. I mean, I'm sure you've seen that cover before. It looms large in its legend, as George Harrison says in The Hard Day's Night. But really, I mean, it's just an incredible piece of jazz, and Coltrane, maybe technically the best jazz player of all, one of the most technical players in the history of jazz. He's easily my favorite jazz artist. And so I'm glad that this made the list. I think Giant Steps is probably, to me, that's my favorite Coltrane album I've heard so far. But there's no knocking this being on the list. I absolutely understand it's an all-time classic. So yeah, got John Coltrane on the list. I'm glad to see him there. And now at number 48, we have Hotel California by the Eagles. Dad Rock Supreme. No, I'm just kidding. genuinely though, I think this is probably a little bit high if you ask me. But this is a classic album. I mean, really, what is there to say about the title track to Hotel California? I mean, everybody knows it. It's been played to death at this point, but genuinely, it is, I think, one of the greatest songs ever written. It's easily the Eagles' magnum opus, and I think this is probably their best album too.
Mhm.
Really, Don Henley, and say what you will about Don Henley and Glenn Frey, but I think they worked so well together as a songwriting team that you can't deny just how impeccably crafted the music is, even if it isn't really necessarily your thing. Because I know a lot of people are kind of turned off by the the really cleanness of the Eagles' music. But I think for me, I don't think that's a problem. I think that's why the Eagles are such an appealing band, is because their music is so, like, it doesn't feel, it still feels like it's substantive most of the time, and it isn't just about the incredible musicianship. I really think the hooks are so memorable, and I mean, this has some of their best songwriting, kind of talking about the decadence of the Hollywood lifestyle, or the industry, and that sort of lifestyle. And obviously at this point in time, the Eagles were hopped up on probably everything, which is why you have Life in the Fast Lane, which is another dad rock classic. You've heard Life in the Fast Lane, you've heard it so many times on the radio. And I immediately recognized it when I first heard this album a few months ago. But also, New Kid in Town is an incredible song. And it just the arrangements, the chord progressions, like, they were all such great musicians. Like, and that's why I think the Eagles have such a large appeal, is because, as I said, it's so well crafted. I do think this album is a little front loaded, though. It's probably my biggest problem with it, because some of the songs in the middle kind of get a little boring and monotonous. But by the time you get to The Last Resort, which is really crazy, Don Henley singing about these capitalists who kind of ravage the land, which is kind of funny because he's like the definition of a capitalist. But he is, the one thing I respect about Don Henley is he's very into environmental causes. So I don't think he would go around like, forcing people off their land or anything. But I think the criticism on this song is very palatable. And definitely one of the most interesting songs. There's no chorus on it. It's just a bunch of verses. But yeah, I mean, you hear the guitar solo at the end of Hotel California, that dual guitar solo with Joel Walsh. And yeah, I mean, it's just so, this is the definition of iconic. So I completely get it being this high on the list.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this is probably a good spot for it. I'm not really too sure, but the Eagles definitely deserve to be on this list. Hotel California alone, the song, is a classic. I will say, going back to you talking about dad rock, I do have an association with the Eagles of long car rides because my parents are huge fans. So that kind of, hearing some of those songs over and over, kind of, I associate with that. But Hotel California in particular, just, every time I hear it, zone out, picturing the scene. It's just an amazing song. I think that this can't go for all of their music for me, but that one song I can't get enough of. It's so good.
In the lyric, oh no, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, the just the time period, I feel like they were perfect for that. They're definitely, if cultural significance plays any part in this list, that they deserve to be there just for that. But yeah, what were you gonna say?
I was just saying the lyrics on the title track too are so cryptic, and that's the thing. It's so intriguing, and it kind of just the metaphors that they're drawing.
Yeah.
It's one of the most interpreted, one of the most analyzed songs of all time. But you had that amazing line at the end where it's like, you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave, and just kind of being trapped
So
in
good.
that life. It's amazing. So even though I put this lower on the list, I'm glad to see the Eagles, as you said, Harrison. It's so important to have them just from a cultural standpoint. By the way, did you vote for this album?
I think so. If so, it was probably further down to my list.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I said when I was making the list, my favorites kind of bounce around from day to day, so
Right.
it's hard to remember what I forgot about. But if I was making it right now, I would definitely put it on. It deserves to be here.
Well, I'm sure that is why it's here. So glad to see it on the list. And at number 47, we have Led Zeppelin 2. First appearance of Led Zeppelin on this list, surprisingly, but in some ways I'm not surprised because they're such a, acclaimed band, and so it makes sense that an album like this would be this high. I think this is genuinely a good spot for it too. But I mean, come on, you start this album, talk about all-time classic. We were just talking about Hotel California. You start this off with A Whole Lot of Love. And, just Robert Plant wailing, you need cooling. I completely screwed that up. But you get it. You get it. This song is just incredible. One of their best songs easily in their entire catalog. But then again, you have Heartbreaker. You got Ramble On, which has like one of the best bass lines from the legendary John Paul Jones. You got John Bonham wailing like a beast on this thing. Jimmy Page going crazy on his guitar. There's so many iconic classics on this album. And I actually like this album more than Zeppelin 4. I think this is Led Zeppelin's best album. So this is the definition of classic rock, if you ask me. There's no if and or buts about it. And just other great tracks. I mean, Moby Dick is one whale of a drum solo. Pun intended. I apologize. But there's just I know. But there's so many iconic tracks on here. Really, one of the best classic rock albums of all time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really listen to too much Zeppelin, but from what I'm seeing is on this album, I would definitely agree. And going back to songwriting, I see that Ramble On, the lyrics were inspired by Tolkien. As a huge Tolkien fan, I gotta appreciate that. Don't they also have other stuff inspired by Lord of the Rings?
Yeah,
I mean, thinking of...
Well, I mean, if you listen to Stairway to Heaven, that's like almost like a very Tolkien-esque journey,
Yeah.
And I was actually, well, I'll get into that at some other point, but it really, they were very inspired by Middle Earth and all that sort of stuff in his writing. So and they have that line about Gollum and Ramble On. So yeah, the direct reference right there. But yeah, man, dude, definitely check this out. I would say start with their debut album, which is also really good. But I don't think Zeppelin really, maybe song wise, there are a few that kind of top anything on this album. Of course, you probably know what I'm talking about, but I definitely think that this is their best album. I really do. So glad to see it on the list. It was one I couldn't put on mine, but absolutely deserving to be here at number 47. And now at number 46, we have Asia by Steely Dan. This is crazy because I was wondering, because obviously Can't Buy a Thrill was right at the bottom of the list, which is personally my favorite Steely Dan album. So I was really curious if that would have made it on as well as Asia. And luckily, I'm here to tell you that it did. So my thing with this album, obviously, the musicianship is just incredible, as I've spoken on about Walter Becker and Donald Fagen, really perfectionists in the studio. I mean, this is one of the best produced albums of all time. This is audiophile level stuff. Like when people go to Steely Dan, they listen for that pristine production. And this is, littered all across this album. I think my problem with it's I don't think some of the songs are like super memorable to me, especially by the end, which is why I don't quite love it. But I understand that a lot of people would say this is Steely Dan's best album. And I definitely say it's my second favorite Steely Dan album. I mean, Black Cow is a great opening track. So catchy and just has some amazing hooks on it, especially for not being like the most melodic song, but it really gets stuck on your head. But I really think Deacon Blues on here is one of their best songs. And I believe Rolling Stone actually put it on their list, their new list of 500 greatest songs of all time. One of the only choices on there was like, yeah, that's warranted. But Peg is also another great song. And you hear Michael McDonald's vocals in the background on it too, which is always great because He's a phenomenal singer. But yeah, really is just the best example of fusing jazz and rock music, and really making something that's very not elitist, but very intellectual. And maybe that won't draw everybody in, and even to some extent it doesn't draw me in fully, but I respect this album a great deal, and I definitely think it's deserving of a spot on this list.
So I've never actually consciously listened to anything by Steely Dan, but to sort of justify its place on this list, going through the Wikipedia article for this album, it says in 2010, the Library of Congress actually selected Asia for inclusion in the United States National Recording Registry based on its cultural, artistic, or historical significance. So that alone kind of like justifies that this deserves a place on this list.
No, absolutely, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that there is so much to say about the recording of this album. There's even a documentary about it, I believe, that I do have to check out. But this is an absolute classic, even though it's not my favorite. I can definitely understand the appeal 100%. So glad to see it on here, number 46. And now at number 45, are you ready, Harrison? Are you ready for this?
I've never been more ready for anything.
Okay. At 45, we have Magical Mystery Tour by the Beatles.
Wow.
First appearance of the Beatles on this list. We were waiting.
I was waiting
for quite some time. But I can assure you, this is definitely not the last Beatles album on this list by any means.
I hope not.
No. But man, talk about one of the best albums of all time. Talk about underrated. Not like number 45. It's crazy to me because I think Magical Mystery Tour always gets passed over when it comes to Beatles albums. And I don't know why. It's never on any of the Rolling Stone list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. And they're putting stuff on like Hard Day's Night and Help, which obviously are great. But come on, I mean, this is one of my top 10 favorite albums of all time. There's every song on here is great. Even though I would say the production on Blue Jay Way is a little questionable. That's like my one complaint about it. And also the fact that this wasn't even technically a studio album by the Beatles, because obviously they made the movie, right, which makes no sense at all, and they threw some songs together on EP and released it in England. But basically this is the only Capitol release, Capitol Records in the US, because obviously the Beatles were on EMI, and this was the only one that superseded the Capitol label and made it into their core discography, which I find very interesting, but I think absolutely makes 100% sense. You just have so many gems on here. The title track is amazing. Obviously, The Fool on the Hill is one of my favorite Beatles songs of all time. And just that flute playing over it, it's just so beautiful. And Paul's lyrics. I mean, really, you listen to that song, another example why Paul McCartney is one of the greatest songwriters ever. I mean, it's hard to really top him. But even so, you have so many iconic tracks like I Am the Walrus, one of John's best songs, one of their best songs. And then you get, obviously you have the songs from the movie and they're all great. But then you get the B-side, which was just a bunch of singles from that year. I mean, literally you have on the same album, Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane, which undeniably are, I would throw in top 10 Beatles songs of all time. Strawberry Fields was actually Rolling Stone chose it as the best Beatles song in their new version of the 500 greatest songs of all time. It was like number 6 or something. And I wouldn't quite put it there, but it's definitely top 50 songs of all time for me. It's just amazing. And Penny Lane, you get that contrast of John and Paul, kind of approaching their childhood, in different ways. And I just think it's so brilliant, the diversity on here. And of course you have songs like Hello Goodbye on that side. You have Baby You're a Rich Man, which for almost 10 years, the only way you could listen to that song on YouTube was the end of The Social Network. Just watch that clip. But of course you end this album with All You Need Is Love, which I think is such a perfect way to end this album, especially this came out 67, the Summer of Love was at its peak. And, I just think that everything on here, this is really the peak of psychedelia to me. I mean, this is the Beatles at their trippiest, no question about it. And I think this album should, get more praise, because legitimately it is, they put this and Sgt. Pepper out in the same year. Like, what other band could ever do something like that and release two of the greatest albums of all time in a single year? I mean, this really is a masterpiece in music. And I'm so glad that it did make the list, and that we're finally seeing the Beatles this high on the list.
Oh my God. I would just like to second pretty much everything that you said there. If anything, this album should be way higher. I don't know. Like, whenever I think about a Beatles album and I'm looking at this song, the track list, I'm like, how did they fit so many bangers on one album? And it's amazing. It's like every time I think, I mean, I might be hyping the Beatles up a lot right now.
No,
but every time I think of the Beatles, I think, how did like the stars align for such a band to exist that's had such an influence it had, that's had such all these amazing songs in like a relatively short time.
It's nuts.
But yeah, like All You Need Is Love, one of my favorite songs of all time. It makes me so happy whenever I listen to it. But I could say similar things about pretty much every song on this album, sort of like what you were saying. Like, I don't know, having to pick Beatles albums is too hard for me to do.
Right.
I think when I put one on my list, I ended up just doing like the one album, which was like, because I know that's probably cheating, but like,
it's fine, but
yeah,
it's great compilation. So,
but yeah, I love the Beatles so much. So
yeah, no, I mean, and that's a good point. I mean, literally, there's never going to be a band who had or just an artist who's had this many hits in such a short amount of time. Like, it's crazy to think like how proficient they were in songwriting. Yeah. It's like, how do you make so many great songs in that like short span of time?
Just thinking of the odds of them meeting up at the time they did, making the songs, and then like piecing out is just like, how did that even happen? But I'm glad it did.
No, go ahead.
No, I just said I'm glad it happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really is a lightning in a bottle moment. There's been some great bands since, and definitely there still will be great artists to come. But I mean, how can you top these guys? Really, there's so much. I have so much to say about it. And also, another thing I wanted to mention, I love in All You Need Is Love at the end. She loves you, yeah. You hear it in the back, and I just love that call out to their earlier stuff. And so the way they kind of bring this whole album to a close is brilliant, and they didn't even put this together. So that just shows you how brilliant they are. The songs speak for themselves. So yeah, Magical Mystery Tour should be way higher, but I'll take it at number 45 here. So at number 44, we have
Let's go.
Ready to Die by the Notorious B.I.G. Yeah, as I said in the last video, I'm not like I'm not the biggest, fan of Biggie Smalls, but there's no question that this is an iconic hip hop record. I think there's some songs on here that I think kind of fall into, he's just like talking about like, he's writing a story about going to shoot someone or like kind of there's some misogynistic lyrics here and there, but really this is definitely a classic in the hip hop genre. There's no question about it, and definitely deserving to be higher than Life After Death. And but this song, I mean, this album, you have that amazing production from Sean Combs, basically, really there's some amazing beats on here. Like the beat on Everyday Struggle is maybe one of the greatest hip hop beats of all time. It blows my mind in that hook. I don't want to live no more. Sometimes I hear death knocking at my front door. I mean, it's just so iconic. And really the bars on here are just incredible. I mean, we're talking about one of the greatest rappers of all time, inarguably, but also, Juicy is one of those songs that's just so incredible that you just don't want it to end. And really, Notorious B.I.G. talking about his, the struggles he had in his upbringing and kind of the trouble he gotten into, and kind of how his rise to fame is kind of like giving him a new perspective. I mean, really, it's called an iconic hip hop song for a reason. Absolutely but of course you have Big Papa, which is also great. It has that really amazing like I think it's like some synth line or something. It's really incredible. Yeah, I mean, what can I say about this album? It's not my favorite album of all time, but it's definitely one I respect. No question about it.
Yeah, like I mean, taking something like this just from the time period it's from, and it kind of gives you, I think it's like a perfect way to look into the sort of window of what the rap hip hop genre was like back in like, this was like the mid 90s, right? Early to
Yeah,
mid 90s.
94, 94.
Yeah. Um, I don't really listen to much music from that time period, but from what I do know about this, I would say, yeah, it definitely has a huge impact culturally and on the genre moving forward. I mean, you could probably tell I'm a history major by how much emphasis I put on like the historical value and cultural significance, but uh, I would definitely say this has a lot of that from what I've heard of it. I haven't heard the whole thing, but from what I have heard, definitely.
Right. And I mean, that album cover too. I mean, just look at like him as a baby. Like, it's just iconic at this point. Everybody's
Right.
seen that very, that cover. And it's just really, I mean, there isn't too much more I can say about this except, even though I'm not like the biggest fan of Biggie Smalls, he's a cultural icon, no question about it. And I think this is definitely, out of the 2 studio albums he came out with, I mean, both of his albums made the list. So I think that's saying something right there. But yeah, this one absolutely, I understand it being on the list as opposed to the other one. So that's a number 44, Ready to Die. And at number 43, we have The Doors.
Ooh.
By, The Doors. So this album, I mean, it took me a while to appreciate this album fully, but I went back and listened to it a few months ago, and I was like, yeah, I was stupid for not loving this the first time around. I think it's a little overrated when it comes to, the best of all time. But I definitely understand it being on the list, especially Jim Morrison is such a prominent cultural figure in counterculture in the late 1960s. But I mean, you start this with Break On Through to the Other Side, which has that, as soon as you hear that organ riff from Ray Manzarek, like, it's the Doors. They're one of those bands that has such an identifiable sound that you recognize right off the bat. But yeah, this album is full of classics. Like, obviously, Light My Fire is on here. I mean, what is there to say about that? And definitely one of the best instrumental breakdowns, even if it goes on for a little bit too long. I mean, I don't care. It's Light My Fire, it's such a great song. But there's definitely some really clever tracks. I think Jim Morrison was a really underrated lyricist, especially on the song 20th Century Fox, which is obviously a play on the movie studio, but also just, him talking about this woman, who's, a 20th Century Fox. And I think the lyrics on there are very clever. Like a lot of the stuff on here. Soul Kitchen has that amazing down, that riff. And it's just not my favorite song on the album, but it definitely is memorable at the very least. And of course, I mean, Jim Morrison's vocals are just insane. I mean, really one of those iconic vocalists. You hear him sing and it's Jim Morrison. And then, of course, I have to talk about the last track on here, which is aptly titled The End. Every time I hear it, I think of the opening of Apocalypse Now with the trees burning. And but this song, it's 11 minutes long, and it's there's definitely some interesting stuff going on in the song. I won't get into it too much if you haven't heard the album, but I think it's their best song. And I mean, what a way to close an already great album. I mean, really, this is another landmark, like I was saying with Magical Mystery Tour, another landmark in psychedelia and just counterculture in the 1960s.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much hit the nail on the head right there talking about that. Jim Morrison, I would agree, definitely a very unique sound. I have always been fascinated by the Doors, even though I may not listen to them too much. I've always been fascinated by them just because of, the time period they take place, the 60s counterculture movement, Vietnam, part of that whole Vietnam music genre sort of thing. But also Morrison himself, just like, the alcoholism and like his mysterious death just adds a lot of mystery that's made me think about them. But in terms of the music itself, yeah, just the unique sound. the, counterculture hippie stuff. Like it's good. I like it.
Yeah,
I don't know
man.
if I personally would have put it so high, but then again, I haven't listened to it in a while. So
Right. And that's the other thing. Like I get this has such, I love the album, obviously you can see by my score, but I get the acclaim of it. So, it's one of those things where I completely understand it, and it should be on the list. It's just an important album, as I was saying. But yeah, absolutely. And yet again, another thing I noticed, I mean, two artists right in a row who died so young in their 20s. One a member of the 27 club there. So I find that very interesting, kind of a little trend there. But yeah, absolutely deserving. The Doors are just the definition of iconic. So at number 42, we have 21 by Adele.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I personally wouldn't put the album this high, but this absolutely deserves to be on the list. And I was actually just listening to this album the other day, a couple of weeks ago, and I mean, there's like hit after hit on this album. It brings me back to when I was like 12 years old, just having the radio playing in my room. And it's incredible. The thing about this album that's so incredible is how it feels so classic yet so contemporary, because it's very acoustic driven. A lot of it's her at the piano and whatnot, and she really recaptures that classic soul sound. And that could have came off as like, outdated, but really, I mean, the songs are so universal. And I mean, talk about the opening track, Rolling in the Deep. Oh. Come on, one of the greatest songs of all time. And just the way that song builds, you start off with that boom, boom, just the acoustic, and there's a fire starting in my heart. And I mean, just that voice. I mean, one of the greatest vocalists of all time, no question about it. She has so much control, so much gravitas to her voice. I mean, incredible. So an absolute masterpiece to start off. But then you have Rumor Has It, Turning Tables, Set Fire to the Rain. I mean, just all these hits after hits, but also, there's some other really great tracks on here, like He Won't Go, I think is brilliant. Take It All is another, great album cut. But of course, the one that really stands out to me, I would put this way up when it comes to the best songs ever. That's Someone Like You. And I know it's been played to death, but the lyricism there is just incredible. Like literally, like I would say Paul McCartney levels lyricism there. Like especially that line, sometimes it lasts in love, but sometimes it hurts instead. Oh my, it really is like one of the best breakup albums of all time, if you will. But really a classic soul record. Really, and it just came out more than 10 years ago. It's crazy that it came out more than 10 years ago, because it does not seem that long ago to me. No. And I tell you, I'm so excited to see Adele back. I'm so excited for her new album. It's definitely my most anticipated of the entire year, no question. She hasn't come out with anything in 6 years.
Wow, that's crazy to think about. I didn't realize it had been that long. But just looking at this album, like Someone Like You, I agree. It's just a really good song. It's so catchy, it sticks in your mind. It's emotional. Rolling in the Deep, amazing. I think you put it nicely when you said her voice has gravitas, because it really does. Like when she's singing, you can't help but just like stop and listen, even if you weren't paying attention. I will say that a lot of these have been played to death on the radio.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes me forget how good they are.
Right.
But seeing it on this list, at first, I'm going to admit, I was like, really? But thinking about, like, I actually took the time to think about it while you were talking.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think, a lot of these are actually really good songs that are probably going to be considered classics one day.
Oh, I absolutely.
And already are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No. So I don't know if I'd put it this high, but I would say it does. I would say it deserves to be on this list, especially if we're talking about contemporary artists. And
No, absolutely, man. And especially when it comes to contemporary artists, she's one of the best.
Oh, for sure.
For sure. And, another thing too, her vocal phrasing is just, even on her new single, Easy on Me, I was just so blown away by the way, you know, it really is, especially, you know, and I'm sure you can agree with someone who's taken vocal lessons, like it's so incredible what she's able to pull off. It's so
Oh yeah.
controlled. Really, she just knows exactly how to portray her songs and the emotion through. And obviously, the levels of introspection on this thing are just crazy good. It's just classic after classic on this album. And
Oh
really,
my
I
God,
think
yeah.
one of the albums from recent memory that it should be considered a classic. So absolutely glad to see it on here, even though I put it a little bit lower, but I'm not going to argue it anymore. I'm so glad to
Yeah.
see it on this list. So at number 41, we have Back in Black by AC/DC. Now, yeah, this is one I haven't heard. I know, probably very shocking, but I haven't really gotten into AC/DC yet. I know a lot of people love this album. A lot of things I hear about AC/DC though is all their songs sound the same. So I'm not really sure about that. I have to listen to, you know, I have to listen to myself, but of course you hear that doon 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 you know, it's like that riff is so iconic at this point. Everybody knows it, even if you're like 3 years old or something. It's just an iconic song, and I'm surprised. I'm looking at this now. It's not even the opening track. That's kind of crazy. But what else on here do I know? I don't know. Maybe I hear You Shook Me All Night Long is a iconic song. Yeah, I really wish I had more to say about this, but I know a lot of people say this is like the epitome of 80s rock, along with Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses, which, you know, was in the last episode.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I haven't really listened to them much either. When I think of AC/DC, I do think of dad rock again, which isn't
Yeah.
necessarily a bad thing, but it
No,
is what I
no.
think of. Yeah, I don't really have much to say about it, other than, like you said, I definitely have to give it a listen. But
Yeah, no, me too, man, because it's just getting through it, you know, getting through their discography right now. That's the thing for me. I have to sit down and get to this album because this is like their sixth album or something. So pretty far along in their career there. But
although I will say, looking at the Wikipedia, apparently when this was released, it made them the first band since the Beatles to have 4 albums in the British top 100 simultaneously. So, I mean, that says something right there.
wow, yeah, I mean, that's a big achievement right there.
Yeah.
No question about it. Yeah, I don't know if it should be this high though, and I haven't even listened to it, but like, you know, I'm sure maybe it's a great album. I might even love it. So I definitely have to check it out at some point. Absolutely. So there you go, AC/DC fans. You got an album on the list. So now
I
we're
hope
getting
you're
into
happy.
yeah. No, it's fine, guys. This is definitely a classic. But at number 40 now, we're getting the top 40 here. We
Woohoo.
have the Charlie Brown Christmas soundtrack. Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with y'all. This is my favorite jazz album of all time. This is one of my favorite albums of all time, no question. It just the musicianship here. Obviously, you look at it like some people could laugh at Christmas songs or whatever, but no, I mean, listen to the musicianship on this record. Like what Vince Guaraldi, you know, what him and his trio do on this album is just it's so intricate. These chord progressions, like there's one on the Christmas Time Is Here instrumental, which is I would say the best song on this entire album, and definitely one of the most iconic Christmas tunes of all time. There's no denying, you know, you know, like everybody knows that melody. You just think of this, you really get into the spirit of Christmas as soon as you hear it. You hear those chords, and but there's like in the middle of the instrumental, because it goes on for like more than 6 minutes or so. There's like this little inversion they do on one of the chords, and it seems like it would be something that's just really, you know, small, right? But it leaves such an impact. Like it's just a very you know, enthralling moment, and it's just so subtle in its execution. But the way they create these hooks on, obviously they take off from you know, already iconic Christmas songs and kind of put their own take on it. But of course you have stuff like um what is it, Christmas Is Coming, yeah, where it's like I think that's the one that you know, and they're like dancing on the stage or whatever. And just the way they're able to to go off on these crazy improvisations and somehow seamlessly bring it back to the melody. It's just beyond me, like how well they executed this trio. It's just impeccable jazz music. But of course, Linus and Lucy too, which was made for this soundtrack. And obviously you have the iconic vocals for Christmas Time Is Here and Hark the Herald Angels Sing, you know, all the stuff you've seen from the short. And to think that this was something that they thought was going to fail, and they were just like, yeah, we should get Vince Guaraldi to do this soundtrack. It just is crazy to me how this stands up as like one of the greatest records of all time, because this could have just been some schlocky music they threw on this holiday special, but yet it's become so much more than that. You know what I mean? It just, this is the definition of iconic. This is one of the greatest albums of all time, and I'm so glad people voted it on the list. Absolutely deserving of it. I would say even higher, honestly.
I mean, personally, seeing this here kind of threw me for a loop and kind of like broke my brain, because because I hope I'm not offending anybody here who really loves this, but I didn't even know this was like an actual like album until right now. So I'm trying to like comprehend it, especially like this high. Like, I love Christmas music as much as the next guy, but I've never really took the time to like sit and analyze and like soak in the songs here, and maybe I should. But you know, looking at the Wikipedia, it says it was certified quadruple platinum. So I guess, you know, a lot of people would agree that it's a great album, and I should give it a chance.
Isn't it in the National Film Registry too? Or not film registry?
Yeah. It was added to the National Recording Registry of the Library of Congress. So yeah, this is a strong hitter, I guess.
It's no joke, man. I mean, really,
yeah.
That dude, really, you got to sit down this holiday season, man. And because obviously you don't want.
This is the Paddington 2 of music.
Oh my goodness!
If you get what I mean by that.
Maybe not everybody listening will understand, but I understand what you mean. But obviously, this isn't just me. You know, obviously, people really, really love this album for it to be this high on the list. And as I said, it should be higher, but I'm not going to complain about it being here at all, because it absolutely deserves a spot here. So glad to see it. Just incredible musicianship from top to bottom. So, and that's only number 40, right? So in number 39, we have Late Registration by Kanye West. Another one. I sound like a broken record here once again, but another one of the greatest albums of all time. And honestly, I think this is Kanye's best record. I mean, really, this is one of the most groundbreaking moments in popular music, and one of the biggest shifts, because obviously you already had the College Dropout, which was a big shift in pop rap and just music in general. I mean, really defined that, you know, that chipmunk soul sound defined a whole, you know, generation of artists coming up after Kanye. But this, I think, one of the best produced albums of all time. This album proves that Kanye is one of the greatest people to ever get into a studio booth. I mean, this guy is a master at samples, especially on Gold Digger, which for the longest time I never realized was I've Got a Woman by Ray Charles. And I'm kicking myself for that. But the way it's utilized here is just, I mean, everybody knows the song. It's an iconic track at this point in time. But I mean, from top to bottom, there's only one song in here I think is all right. But just the way Kanye attacks social critiques on this album is so mind-blowing to wrap your head around. Like, you essentially listen to Diamonds from Sierra Leone, which they took a Bond theme from a really crappy James Bond movie, a song I'm not particularly like fond of anyway, and gave it this new life, and really brought it to this whole other level, elevated the material so much that it becomes Kanye's song, really. And then you got Jay-Z on there too, but his critiques about, you know, kids kind of, you know, mining blood diamonds in Sierra Leone, and how that's related to the drug trade in the US, and how basically the people who are involved in the drug trade use that money from it to buy those diamonds. I was like, who thinks of this? I mean, it's so complex. It just blows my mind how intricate of a songwriter Kanye is, because obviously when you see him speaking in interviews, he's not always the most articulate person. He like goes on about like some crazy stuff no one knows what he's talking about. But when you listen to his music, it's so well articulated, and I think that's maybe Kanye's best song in my opinion. I'm not sure, but I have to think of. But obviously, there's so many great features on here, especially on We Major. We have Nas. I mean, we were just talking about Nas a few episodes ago. One of the greatest rappers in the game. Even I'm not a huge Maroon 5 guy, but Adam Levine guy, I should say. But his feature on Heard 'Em Say It, I think is perfect. I've listened to that song so many times. There's just so many great songs. And then of course, Hey Mama, which is one of the most beautiful songs a child has ever written to their parent. And just, you could tell like that Donda meant so much to him. So when she passed, it really kind of screwed him all up. She was like his rock. And I think this song is the epitome of, the love he had for his mother. But yeah, just from top to bottom, I mean, it's hard to argue that this isn't one of the greatest rap albums of all time. This probably is, like, if we don't count Hamilton, of course, this probably is my favorite hip hop album of all time. I mean, it's almost flawless if you ask me. And definitely definitely I understand how people looked up to Kanye as a beacon of hope, especially in the Black community, because a lot of the critiques he makes on this album, they feel so palpable, and really he strikes a nerve and articulates something that a lot of people weren't willing to say or could say. So absolutely, Late Registration is an absolute classic in the most highest degree.
Yeah, I mean, you've been telling me to listen to Kanye for a while, and
yes, sir.
He is definitely very high on my list. I have not listened to much Kanye at all. But that being said, I do know enough about him to understand how significant this time period and specifically this album was, not only in his career, but in the genre as a whole. Like basically what you were saying, like just all of the issues he touches on are, aside from the good music, are just incredibly important. And I would say this is definitely high on my list of albums to check out, just because of the significance and because of how, love him or hate him, how important Kanye is as a musical figure even today.
There's no question. I mean, he's one of the most influential artists of all time. I mean, and that's only, he hasn't even been around in the game for 20 years, and you can already say that about him. Like, what other figure from that, time period can you say that about? Literally nobody, except maybe Radiohead. But even then,
yeah, it's wild.
I mean, Kanye, love him, as you said, love him or hate him, but there's no denying he's such a brilliant musician. So I would even say this album should be higher, but because I think it's his best record. But so glad to see it. I mean, 39 is nothing to scoff at all, So, and obviously a lot of people agree with me to that it is this high. So really glad to see it at number 39. And at number 38, we have Spiderland by Slint. Now this is one, it's so interesting. This is one of the most interesting albums I've ever heard, because it really is one of those albums that people kind of passed over at first and didn't really look at. And then later on, they're like, wow, this is so influential in like math rock and all those sorts of, very obscure indie genres. But I get the appeal of this album 100%. For me, because the vocals are really kind of thrown, like they're kind of buried underneath these amazing guitar riffs and just really, really heavy sound that Slint brings to their music. And I think, but the lyrics, with their pretensions and everything, I just think are so interesting. And I just kind of wish I didn't have to go out of my way to like look up the lyrics, because obviously I want to hear it clearly when I'm listening to it. And maybe that's the appeal of this album. But I mean, songs like Don Amon, I think, are just so, it strikes a chord with, one of these albums I think could kind of fall into the edgy teen category. And I'm not saying that as a negative at all, but that's just kind of what it's dealing with, issues of social alienation, especially on Don and Mon, which I think is the masterpiece of the album, 100% lyrically and execution. And he's kind of like, I forgot the lead vocalist name, but he's like kind of speaking that whole song, just kind of telling the story of this kid not wanting to go to a party and just kind of being disappointed by the outcome of it. And yeah, it really is such an interesting album. It's one I definitely respect a great deal. I certainly would not have it this high, but I understand a lot of people really, really love it. And it's definitely very influential in its own right.
Yeah, I've actually never heard of this album before, but looking at it, it's had a major influence on like post rock and math rock bands, sort of like you were saying. So it looks like the influence is wide lasting. I haven't heard of this before somehow, even though a lot of bands I've listened to seem to be influenced by it. So this is something I'll definitely have to check out, but I can't really speak much to it other than that.
Yeah, man. I mean, it definitely, as I said, I get the appeal of it, but you know, I wouldn't put it above Late Registration or 21 or Charlie Brown Christmas, or you know what I mean? But you know, there you go, guys. Slyn is on the list at number 38. So at number 37 now, we have Bridge Over Troubled Water.
Yes.
By Simon and Garfunkel. I mean,
the boys.
Yes, the boys. No, look, I mean, this is another one, and I know Harrison will agree with me here. This is another one of the greatest albums of all time. I think Simon and Garfunkel are easily the greatest duo in music. I mean, Paul Simon.
I think this was in my top 10.
This was in your top 10?
Either that or my top 15.
Well, I mean, hey, that's kind of right around where it is for me as well. Definitely top 20 albums of all time for me. This is proof that Paul Simon is one of the greatest musicians to ever live. And I just think as a songwriter, this is really, I think his songwriting in his solo career, he got even better. But I think when it comes to melody, when it comes to consistency, I mean, nothing can top this. I mean, the title track alone, I actually hadn't heard the song in full, believe it or not, until like early this year. Like I'd never listened, you know, I'd never sat down and listened to it or heard it at all. And just easily Art Garfunkel's best vocal performance. I mean, just the definition of beauty, just that angelic voice of his just permeates the entire track. And I know Paul Simon later said he regretted giving that song to Art because it's just such an incredible piece of, this is one of the greatest songs of all time. No question about it, you know, just, and then of course you have Hal Blaine on the drums, just pounding and the, you know, with that snare. I mean, it's just undeniable when you hear it. It really, it's a quasi gospel number. And it just, and I mean, obviously many people have taken it and done a great deal with it, like Aretha Franklin. But you know, this is definitely the definitive version. But even so, like the way he adapts, you know, Peruvian folk music on El Condor Pasa, you know, and it kind of went on, you know, kind of planted the roots for when he would later go on to do Graceland and, you know, integrate all these African musicians and African, you know, sounds into his music. But then, of course, Cecilia is another great track. You know, it's just that Cecilia, you're breaking my heart. You know, it's like one of those songs that's just so catchy. And he even said, like, I thought Cecilia was going to be the hit on the album. They weren't going to put Bridge Over Troubled Water out as a single. But then he said, you know, and it was a hit, which I think goes to show you how strong this album is. And then, of course, there's so many underrated album tracks like Keep the Customer Satisfied, which has, you know, Paul Simon's brilliant sense of humor littered throughout it. You even have Bossa Nova on So Long, Frank Lloyd Wright. And of course, I mean, how can I not talk about The Boxer? And that's really when Hal Blaine comes into, yeah, exactly. I mean, when Hal Blaine comes and he kicks that snare, I remember, I forgot who it said they were on the elevator in that building and they thought a cannon went off, you know, because it was just such a powerful moment. And just so loud. And yeah, it really, and the lyrics too, kind of like the semi-autobiographical tale of Paul Simon, you know, him trying to, you know, talk about his journey as an artist, and his, leaving home and finding his way to the top of the music game, because he certainly reached there at one point. And then, of course, Baby Driver, which I've known ever since I watched the movie of the same name, which is just like, I mean, this album, I mean, all these songs are incredibly well written. I mean, what else can I say about it, except it's probably the best folk rock album of all time, if you ask me.
Yeah, you pretty much said it all right there. Like, this is a perfect showcase about what a lyrical genius Paul Simon is. I don't know. Like, you pretty much said it. Great album, great songs. I love listening to this when I'm trying to relax, or just like pretty much anytime. I think the Boxer and Bridge Over Troubled Water especially are some of the best songs ever written. Yeah, you pretty much said it all. I don't have much to add other than this is a masterpiece. And if you haven't heard Simon and Garfunkel before, just listen to this album. Pretty much tells you what you need to know.
Well, you should also listen. I also think Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, Thyme, and Bookends are also great records. But this is easily the best they've ever done. I mean, this is some of the best anybody's ever done. And it's so interesting you say you listen to this when you want to feel like, when you want to relax, or because it really is comfort food. And I don't mean that in a bad way where it's kind of disposable.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, it really is very articulate musically, and it's just so much fun. Yeah, it has so much substance there, and a lot of the songs, it's just, you don't really get much better of a songwriter than Paul Simon, and just the blend of him and Art Garfunkel, man. I mean, you don't get much better than this. And to talk about last albums, right? I mean, come on, what a way to go out. The only last album I would even put on this level is Abbey Road, so it really goes to show how iconic of a duo they are, and that their music still stands the test of time to today. I mean, this came out over 50 years ago, and yet we're still talking about it as one of the greatest albums of all time. So absolutely deserving to be this high, maybe a little bit higher, but I definitely will take it at number 37 here. So with that being said, at number 36, we have Legend, the best of Bob Marley and the Wailers. When it comes to compilation albums, I'm not surprised that this one made it at all. It personally isn't quite my favorite, but there's no denying how great it is. I mean, Bob Marley is one of my favorite musicians of all time, and talk about another influential figure. I mean, this guy took reggae music, with a genre people kind of looked at as kind of like, oh, it's that weird Jamaican thing. It was kind of like a joke, but he legitimized it as an art form, and almost very much so a political tool, because the thing about Bob Marley, I don't know if you knew this, Harrison, but when he would visit other countries, he would get a welcoming that was reserved for the head of state, because I
did not know that.
Yeah, man, he was viewed like, that's how prominent of a figure he was in Jamaica, to the point which someone, attempted to assassinate him, which I'm sure you probably knew about. And it goes to because he knew the power of music, and he understood how it could be used as a political tool. And I don't think anybody else besides Dylan, I would even say not even quite to the same extent, because Dylan went on to do other stuff, but Bob Marley really understood intrinsically the power of music, and he kind of communicated that through his messages. And my biggest problem with this album, because obviously there's only one song I don't really love on here, but the thing about it is this was kind of marketed toward a white middle class audience. So they kind of took off a lot of stuff about the African slave trade and, marijuana and stuff, and just kind of made it, obviously you have hits like Is This Love, which, I mean, I completely get that. It might be my favorite Bob Marley song. It's just so catchy. And then, of course, you have songs like Three Little Birds, which everybody, that every little thing's going to be all right. Everybody knows that. Buffalo Soldier is just another iconic track. But even so, with that being said, you still get that political edge in a lot of these songs. It just isn't as prevalent as actual studio albums like Catch a Fire. But absolutely, I understand this is the best-selling reggae album of all time. It's one of the best-selling albums of all time. And I'm just so glad to see Bob Marley on this list, because the list wouldn't feel right without him,
Yeah, I would agree with that last statement. I've never really listened to much Bob Marley, mostly because I'm not a big reggae guy. Like, it's just not my cup of tea.
Oh,
However, I would say that because of the relevance he's had in music in just the time period in general, I would agree with you that this list would not be complete without him. Even though his music isn't my cup of tea, just for basically every reason you said, I would say, yeah, like I would definitely agree with where this is. And a lot of songs, I know you said this was a compilation album, but of course, there's so many classics here too. Where, yeah, I'd find it hard to disagree with this.
and it also comes down to like when it comes to compilation albums for me, it's like, well, what do you have there? Like, if it's great, it's great.
Yeah,
As far as I'm concerned. And I mean, this thing is just loaded with classics, no question about it. Some of the best reggae songs of all time, and to some extent, some of the best songs of all time. But yeah, absolutely deserving of a spot on this list. Even though I wouldn't quite put it there, but still, I'm glad to see it. It's at a pretty decent spot. Now, the next album, I'll be honest, I was a little shocked that it was
oh
this
boy.
high. I was shocked that it made the list, really, especially over some other stuff. But I know this was very high on your list, Harrison.
Okay.
No question about it. And so at number 35, we have "Damn" by Kendrick
Ah,
Lamar. I mean, let me say this though. I mean, this is a great album. Obviously, Kendrick, I think, is a genius. I mean, really,
yeah.
I would even go to say one of the all-time greats already. And he's only come out with 4 albums, but not a weak album whatsoever in sight. And I think that's going to continue over to his next album because he's taken so long to make it and release it. But I mean, this is an interesting album because I think what works about it so well is Kendrick took, mainstream rap, and he kind of put it in his own sandbox, and he was still able to make it appeal to a mass audience, but still make it very palpable. I mean, just listen to like DNA is just such a, I got royalty, got loyalty inside my DNA, and just, I mean, rapping his ass off. I mean, when you get to the end of that song, you're like, holy crap, like, how does this guy do it? I mean, one of the greatest MCs of all time. And, obviously there's songs on here like, well, I think the one with U2, XXX, is really interesting because you wouldn't have thought a collab with Bono and the boys would come off so well, but it really does, and it's a powerful political statement too, which is funny because they're an Irish band, but
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, just really, he really takes the best elements of mainstream rap and taps into it, and still, I mean, even though it isn't as conceptual as something like Good Kid, Mad City, or To Pimp a Butterfly, he still makes it very conceptual. Because isn't it like something like you play this album backwards or something, and like I don't know exactly how that goes, but I've heard that there's like something that goes on with if you play it backwards.
Well, yeah, I don't know about playing it backwards, but I do know that it's like a cycle where it
The
ends
cycle,
the
yeah,
way it
yeah, yeah.
began. Yeah. It ends with the same thing as like the first song begins with I was taking a walk the other day. And yeah, I think if I had to redo my list, I would probably rate To Pimp a Butterfly higher just because of the concept of that one and the themes. But in general, Kendrick is just brilliant when it comes to, the thematics, the lyrics, this pretty much everything, which is why I personally rated him very high. Um, just like, I don't even know, just the way that the album flows into each other. All the songs are so memorable on their own. Yeah, I listen to this quite a bit. I think personally Kendrick's voice, just the way he sounds, is incredible. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know, just something about this album really really does it for me. And
And the
yeah,
other
go
thing
ahead.
about Kendrick, I was going to say that he does that sing-songy, Drake thing. He does it very well, but he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't like sound like Drake. I mean, we're comparing Kendrick to Drake. I think it's obvious who's way better. But I
Right.
mean, this album too, I just kind of his search for him reckoning with, his religion, and
Yeah.
also his identity as a black man, because like you get that line, we're Israelites, don't call me black no more, which is
Yes.
really,
Yes.
and then that whole thing at the end. And I have to talk about Fear though, because I think Fear is one of his best songs and some of the best rapping he's ever done. Kind of like talking about. I'm guessing it was about his father and kind of the abusive relationship he had with him, and it's so powerful. Like, talk about the definition of powerful. But this album, I'll be honest, I don't think it deserves to be this high at all. On the list, sure. I mean, obviously it's a great album. I love it. There's no question about it. But I mean, this is, I mean, Over Bridge Over Troubled Water and Late Registration and like all this, like 21. I don't know if I could ever put it that high. And I especially think that he has better records, which we may or may not talk about on this list. But yeah, 35 of all time. Yeah, I'm not feeling that.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think it deserves to be rated pretty high, but when you put it like that over like Bridge Over Troubled Water, Beatles, I don't know about that, but I would say Kendrick as an artist is definitely one of the goats for sure.
Sure.
Which album I would rate higher? I think if I had to do it again, like I said, probably To Pimp a Butterfly, maybe even Good Kid, Mad City, just because of the whole concept behind it. I would put higher, but I love all three of the albums. It's really hard for me to choose between them.
Right. They're all great, but I was going to say, because I noticed Good Kid, Mad City wasn't on your list, and I was like, what?
I mean, I realized that too. It was kind of me not wanting to put too much Kendrick on the list, but I don't know. Like, I kind of wish I put it on now.
Dude, I wish you did too. I really, the more the better, honestly. That's like, I don't care. Like, I voted for like 5 Beatles albums or maybe 6. So you know what I mean? Like, I don't really, we're probably 5, right. But I don't really care.
I was trying to diversify my list too much.
No,
but if I had to do it again with some better reflection, it would probably look pretty different.
Okay. Yeah, no, because Good Kid, Mad City, man. I don't think this even comes close to Good Kid, Mad City. I just listen.
I mean, I don't want to talk too much about that one in case it shows up later.
Right.
But just the fact that he calls it like a short film by Kendrick Lamar, and then you listen to it and you're like, yeah, it pretty much is a kind of a short film. There's so much to analyze.
Right. And it's definitely more, not to say that Damn isn't comprehensible, but it's definitely easier to follow because the narrative is more engaging.
Right. Yeah, easily. For sure.
And I think there's definitely some weak spots on this album where he kind of, whose love is, it's fine. There's songs on here that kind of stand out as a little weak and him selling out a little too much.
Yeah.
But Kendrick selling out sounds pretty damn good. No pun intended. Really, I mean, he's one of the best. So that was at number 35. And at number 34, we have The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars by David Bowie. This, I will say, this isn't my favorite album of all time or anything, but like we were saying with Bob Marley, the list would not feel right without Mr. David Bowie. I mean, one of the most acclaimed musicians of all time. I love him. He isn't my personal favorite artist yet. He's not quite there, but there's no question he was a genius and a brilliant songwriter. I think the thing with this album, well, first I'll get into the tracks. Obviously, Moon Age Daydream, absolute classic. The title, well, this kind of title track, Ziggy Stardust, is also great. Let's see what else we have on here. There's some really great songs throughout this whole thing, but of course I have to talk about Starman, which is one of his most iconic songs. You know, that chorus, there's a star man waiting in the sky, like it's just so iconic. It really is the definitive moment in glam rock. I think that song in particular, I just think this album, and I know this is kind of how they went about it. It really does feel like they kind of wrote these songs and then put a concept album together, like after the fact, because it doesn't really, like, the narrative of it, it doesn't really feel that cohesive 100% of the way through. But I mean, obviously this is Bowie's most acclaimed album, so I'm not surprised it made the list. I'm not surprised it made it this high, and honestly, I'm fine with it because I get it.
Yeah, just what can I say? Just about the song Starman itself. That song is definitely one of my top songs to listen to. I don't know where I'd rate it because that's not this project, but still. This album, I love listening to it. Like I've gotten into reading science fiction recently. I listen to it while I'm reading that. It really helps. I just really love this album. I really love David Bowie, both as a person and as a singer.
Yeah,
I think he's a really good person.
Brilliant human being.
Yeah, and yeah, that's basically all I have to say. Is I think it deserves. I don't know about this spot, but definitely high up on the list.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's albums I love more than it, but that's personal bias aside, like I can respect the spot and the cultural influence of this album. So yeah, absolutely deserving. I'm glad to see Bowie on the list. This is his first time here, so really glad that he made it. And now at number 33, we have Purple Rain by Prince and the Revolution. Now, I'll be honest. I think Sign of the Times is his best album. It is one of the greatest albums of all time. It did not make the list, which I think is ridiculous, especially because there's some other albums that did make it. But, I mean, I'm so glad we have Prince on here. Prince, let me tell you, I didn't vote for this album. I find it slightly overrated, and I'll get into why. But obviously, this is a classic. Prince is one of my favorite artists of all time. I just started getting into him this year. I would put him right in my top 10 favorite artists ever. I mean, probably the most brilliant musician who's ever walked the face of this earth. I mean, this man played 26 instruments. He's one of the greatest singers of all time. He was an incredible songwriter. And I think this really is his most accessible album when it comes to his pop sensibility. Because I mean, you start this off with Let's Go Crazy, and that amazing like pseudo sermon bit, the dearly beloved, you start off, you hear it. But man, purple rain, like that song is one of the greatest songs of all time. I just listened to this album again and I liked it even more coming back to it. That song is just one of the most beautiful songs ever written. And then when he's like goes super high into his falsetto at the end and that guitar solo, I mean, really, how can you knock this song at all? But even so, I mean, When Doves Cry is proof that you don't need a bass to make an amazing track. Obviously there's just so, and then Darling Nikki, I mean, there's a lot to be said about that song, but let's just say he pissed off Tipper Gore and got the parental advisory sticker slapped on every album that came out after it. But yeah, I mean, there's so much he did here. And then The Beautiful Ones is one of his most powerful vocal performances, one of his best ballads. But I will say the thing for me in Purple Rain is I think the production sounds pretty dated, especially when it comes to the 80s synths and whatnot. And I don't think it had the punch, the punchiness that some of Michael Jackson's albums had. Like, and I think Prince was better than Michael Jackson. I'm just going to throw that out there. Just by it's so hard between the two. Obviously, that's a big debate, but I definitely am more of a fan of Prince. But I just think that the mix, it just doesn't sound. I don't think it holds up as well today as it did when it came out. And I think some of the songs are a little light lyrically. That's why I love Sign of the Times, because that was when Prince really flourished as a songwriter, writing these really introspective love songs, these very, very, very biting social critiques, and just experimenting like, through the roof. I mean, it's just crazy how well that album comes together. And the fact that he's basically making this whole album, obviously had the Revolution here, which is a great backing band for him and a great fit to these songs. But obviously I love this album so much. It's a classic. And so I'm glad Prince is on the list because he's one of the all-time greats.
Yeah. I haven't listened to a Prince album in full, but just saying Purple Rain, just looking at that alone makes me be like, yes, this deserves its spot. Prince was amazingly influential, I believe.
Yeah,
and,
no, absolutely.
It's just like you said, he's an amazing musician, and it's incredible. I haven't listened to this album, so I can't really comment on where this album deserves, but just taking Purple Rain into account, the song, I would say that it deserves to be this high up.
Right. And one of the best closing tracks of all time, too. One of the best title and closing tracks ever. I mean, really, how do you get much better than Purple Rain? I would, personal bias aside, though, I get how this is like the definition of iconic. Him on that motorcycle, and you know, it really, I mean, it doesn't. The movie's not good, but this is one of those cases where the album is just so much better than the movie. And really just an iconic record. So it's great to see Prince on here at all because, he's one of my favorites. So absolutely deserving to be on the list. Now at number 32, we have Highway 61 Revisited by Bob Dylan.
How much Dylan has been on this list so far?
This is the fourth Dylan album.
Okay.
But I think a lot of people would say that this is his best album. It's crazy to me because I don't think this is quite as consistent as a lot of people make it out to be, because I think some of the songs sound a little bit the same. And I think there's just some that don't really hit lyrically on the level that Dylan, usually does. But I mean, this was his peak as a songwriter, which, that being said, is just unparalleled. You like literally open this album with Like a Rolling Stone. You hear that, hear that snare and then that intro, and you just know that you're getting into one of the greatest songs of all time. And just the whole story, that how does it feel? It's everybody knows the song, I would think. I didn't listen to it for a while, but when I did, I was like, yeah, this is great. There's no, and then you got songs like Tombstone Blues, which is such a cryptic song lyrically, but I think Dylan is hitting on so many things. And you have amazing lines like, the sun's not yellow, it's chicken. And it's like, how do you get better than that, And then, of course, there's so many great songs here. The Ballad of a Thin Man. The title track is really great. But let me tell you something, Harrison. Desolation Row is the greatest song ever written. And I think the greatest album closer to any record I've ever heard. And it's over 11 minutes long. So this is what I'll say. It's lyrically the greatest song of all time.
Okay.
And I just think, and it would probably be like my second favorite song ever. It's really, I mean, every time I listen to it, I'm just blown away.
Wow.
Completely enthralled. And it's the way he mixes these literary characters and kind of subverts our expectations of what we know about them, and kind of placing kind of mishmash, because there's Cinderella and Romeo, and you're like, what are they doing thrown in here? And then, like the lines he throws in, she's sweeping up tonight on Desolation Row. It's just, what is he talking about? What is going on in the song? And then you got amazing lines too, like they spoon-fed Casanova and poisoned him with words. I mean, just amazing stuff like that is proof that this is like lyrically the most complex, the most brilliant song ever written. I do not debate that for 1 second. It is, I think, Dylan's magnum opus, and that's coming from an album that has his other best song on it. So I think that the fact that you bookend those two songs is proof, basically, how great this album is, even though I don't quite love it. But I'll tell you, love it to the extent other people do, because this was definitely on my list. I had to put this album on. Just a lyrical, it's a masterclass in lyricism. You really don't get any better lyrics on any other album than this. And absolutely just the way he, took basically these very simple chord progressions, the blues rock and kind of brought it to a whole other level lyrically. I mean, this is just unbelievable. And just the definition. I mean, look at that album cover once again, just him sitting in that chair. I mean, you don't get much more iconic than that. And absolutely Dylan at his peak.
Yeah, you've definitely piqued my interest about Desolation Row. I've not heard that song yet, but you've hyped it up enough. I'm going to go listen to it. So I'll tell you what I think.
I'll tell you should listen to this album though before you listen.
Okay.
That was the first time
I heard within the album.
Yeah, man. Because you listen to it as a closing track, and you're just like as I said, every time I listen to it, I am blown away. I cannot believe that someone came up with something that brilliant. Really. And this is yet again, this album is proof why Dylan is like one of my absolute favorite artists of all time, more than most artists I've mentioned on this list. But I think that goes to show why he has so many records on this list. And yeah, so absolutely deserving to be this high, even though I'd put it a little lower. It's Bob Dylan. I mean, come on. So, and that's just at number 32, right? So at number 31, we have The Stranger by Billy Joel.
There we go. I was wondering when he'd show up.
Yeah, man. Well, I think it's safe to say this is probably the one Billy Joel record you'll see on this list. But man, this is one of my top 10 favorite albums of all time. I'm so glad to see it this high. It absolutely, and I would even say higher, but I get where it is on this list. This really, from top to bottom, I mean, it's hit after, like, I've heard it been called a mini greatest hits album because there's so, I mean, literally you start this album with Moving Out, which I was actually just listening to. I was walking home from work yesterday and that song came on my playlist, and it's just so iconic. And then of course the title track is also really great. Just the Way You Are, way better than the Bruno Mars song, but one of the best ballads of all time. And obviously, you know, you have others like Vienna, Only the Good Die Young. I mean, listen to this track. She's Always a Woman. Get It Right the First Time, which I think is one of the weaker songs, but it's still great. You know, it's so catchy. The message of it is really great. So yeah, and obviously I think it ends on the weakest note on Everybody Has a Dream, but they have that Stranger melody, you know, with the whistling to kind of bookend the whole album together. But how can I not talk about this album and talk about what I think, once again, one of my top 10 favorite songs to ever exist, and that's Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. It's just a magnum opus in storytelling and songwriting, and you had those amazing sax solos that come in on the interludes there, and just how he's like rekindling with this old flame of his, you know, having dinner, you know, I'll meet you anytime you want in our Italian restaurant. They get the whole story about Brenda and Eddie. I mean, it is basically a musical journey in the sense, like in the same vein of like Bohemian Rhapsody. It's a very multifaceted song. It has a lot of different phrases musically speaking when it comes to verses and like it really is so complex in his execution, but it feels so cohesive. It does not feel like it's sloppily put together at all. This is the work of one of the greatest singer-songwriters of all time, one of my favorite artists, and one I was lucky to see enough back in August, which I'll always remember. Just at 72 years old, he still sounds really, really great for his age, and he looks good, and he's still killing it out there. And I mean, you really don't get much better than this album. This is one of the greatest albums of all time.
Yeah, I saw him Fenway Park in 2019, I think.
Oh, did you?
But, yeah, I did. It was great. It was a great concert experience. But this album, yeah, like you were saying, it's pretty stacked in terms of the music that's on it. Billy Joel, I think a common theme coming from this list is that good storytellers are some of the best musicians. And I think he just happens to be a really good storyteller. Like each of these songs, Vienna, Scenes from Italian Restaurant, like you were saying, they have like the stories in them. They have, you know, those messages that really make you think, like Vienna in particular. Like, I love listening to that. It's a great song on its own, but the whole message about just like, you know, enjoying your life, it's amazing. Like I just love Billy Joel. What else can I say?
I mean, who doesn't, right? And then of course, speaking of Vienna, you got that line, "Dream on, but don't imagine they all come true."
Exactly.
Which is such a palpable thing to, because obviously, you know, you want to shoot for the stars, but like, let's be realistic about this. Not everything you want to do is going to come to fruition. And just one of the most brilliant lyrics, one of the most brilliant lyricists. I mean, absolutely. And this album deserves to be this high. But yeah, I'm so glad to see it on the list and to see Mr. William Martin Joel. So at number 30 now, we're getting up there. We're getting up there.
Yeah, we're getting close.
At number 30, we have "OK Computer" by Radiohead. I figured anybody who knows anything about music and has already seen I mean, even the Bends made this list, so I think it was pretty obvious that OK Computer was going to be here. You know what? I absolutely understand. This is a great record. Personally, I wouldn't put it this high, but that's just me. I completely get the appeal of this album. There's a couple songs here and there like Climbing Up the Walls and electioneering that I don't think are like that memorable. I think some of the production kind of drowns Tom York's voice too. But this is like one of the best concept albums ever too, kind of talking about social alienation and kind of like Tom York's desire to find meaningful relationships and kind of finding some purpose in life and not, trying not to be on Tom. Of course, you have Hitter or Fitty. I can't even speak. Give me 1 second. Fitter Happier. There we go. Which is like one of the most disturbing. Like Tom York said, that's like the most disturbing song I've ever written. So I'm glad I didn't sing it. And you get that amazing, like just the monotonous nature of all the menial tasks we do day in and day out, which I think a lot of this album hits on, especially that song. But I mean, Paranoid Android is another song like Scenes from an Italian Restaurant or Bohemian Rhapsody, right? That is just so multifaceted. And the fact that they did that all in one take, like they did that live, is insane. Just in Johnny Greenwood, his guitar playing. I mean, it's just that the very ethereal, very spacious. It really reminds me. This is the closest thing to the Dark Side of the Moon that's come out since the Dark Side of the Moon, if you ask me. I genuinely, and I don't throw that praise around, obviously, because that's such a magnum opus. But I mean, Radiohead definitely deserves all the credit. My favorite song is Subterranean Homesick Alien, which I just think is incredible lyrically and just so many things. And then of course you have like so much diversity on here too, with like No Surprises, which is kind of like some twisted take on Louis Armstrong's What a Wonderful World, and just with a handshake with carbon monoxide. I mean, it's just crazy what the depth.
It's heavy.
I mean, that really is the definition of it. And then Lucky is another great song, which I can really relate to because, one day you think everything in your life is going great. And then the next day it can come crashing down like that. I'm climbing out of the air crash, pull me out of the air crash. I mean, it's just, and then The Tourist is such a great closing track, just telling us to really slow down and truly appreciate everything that's around us and to kind of take a moment and appreciate life for what it is.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything you said there. This album, I've been listening to this album for years now, and Radiohead just never fails, especially like this era of Radiohead never fails.
Best era of Radiohead from what I've heard.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Fitter Happier, because I think that gets overlooked a lot just because people hear like the robot voice and they're like, what is this? But the first time I heard it, I had to like sit back and be like, oh, that's kind of terrifying, because you're like condensing a human life into these like robotic automatic motions. And then when they say whatever, like what is it, like a hamster in a cage pumped with like antibiotics or something, it's like
something like that.
Like that. That's not the exact thing. But yeah, like basically what you're saying, like you got Paranoid Android, Exit Music for a Film, No Surprises, Karma Police, just so many good songs. A lot of them are beautiful musically and lyrically. This is definitely one of my favorite albums of all time, I have to say. And I've never thought about it compared to Dark Side of the Moon before, but that's an interesting comparison, and I definitely like that a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's I'm thinking about it now, and it kind of does make sense. So
yeah, because I mean, it sounds like it sounds so otherworldly. Like there isn't another record that really sounds like OK Computer, and so that's why I understand why it's this high on the list. Like I'm not going to complain about this at all, because I love it. It just wasn't on my list, which that doesn't really mean anything, because it's still a phenomenal album from top to bottom. So that's at number 30. And now at number 29, we have Quadrophenia by The Who. As you can see, Big Who fan right here. Gotta love the Who. One of the greatest bands of all time. First appearance of the Who on this list. Surprisingly, we hadn't seen anything up to this point. And yeah, this is a classic album. Honestly, I think this is a little overrated though, because I think this album has its pitfalls. I certainly would not put it this high. I wouldn't even put it above Purple Rain. But I mean, because there's some stuff on here that I think when Pete Townsend really dives into these really long concept albums, he kind of loses some kind of through line narratively. So you kind of get lost a little bit. But there's some songs on here I don't like Dr. Jimmy. I don't think is that great. But obviously, I think The Real Me is just one of their best songs and just an absolute slammer. Obviously, the title track I think is pretty great. Cut My Hair, The Punk and the Godfather, and the way. And the thing I love about this album though is kind of how Pete Townsend uses these different facets, like the quadrophenia, kind of a take on schizophrenia, right? But quad is it's supposed to represent the four members of the Who and their individual personalities. So I really love how he kind of taps into that, and kind of how he harkens back to their old music too, because you have references to My Generation, you have references to I Can't Explain, but really, I mean, besides Pete Townsend really kind of tapping into the concept album like he always has, Keith Moon on this album, you listen to this album and you think he's the drum god. His drumming on this is just so incredible. Proof that I think he's the greatest drummer who ever lived. But this song, I mean, there's so many other great songs too, like 515. I just heard that at work the other day on the radio. I was like, what? I was like, I've never heard the song on the radio. But yeah, it's a really great concept album about this very troubled youth. And it really kind of reflects the Who and who they were at this point of time, and kind of like hearkening back to their roots a little bit. Pete Townsend trying to strip down all the ego in the band and make a record that really was true to them. And I think, I understand why people really love this album. Obviously I love it, but I just think it has some problems and some glaring weaknesses that some other Who albums don't.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've listened to the Who, but I really do appreciate them and their music. I don't really have much to add other than what you just said. I think I appreciate them. I don't really go out of my way to listen to them, but
you should.
Yeah, okay.
Definitely, man. No, this is a classic though. I mean, I just think it's way too high on this list, but I absolutely understand why it's here. No question about it. So we're getting close to the end of this episode. We only have a few left, but I'm excited to talk about what's up next, because all these next three albums, man. I'll tell you, after Back in Black, like I've heard all of these records, so I'm very familiar with all of these, and some of these are my favorites. Like what we have at number 28, Rubber Soul by the Beatles. Actually, I was just listening to this the other day. And for some reason, this isn't quite my favorite Beatles record, especially because it ends with Run for Your Life, which is one of their worst songs. Not that it's particularly terrible because it's the Beatles, but it's just the message of it is awful. And I know John Lennon discredited a lot, but he discredited everything he did. There's so many songs on here that are just my favorite Beatles songs. And I mean, you start this with Drive My Car, which, I mean, what is such a great opening, with it, that just the riffs from George Harrison across this whole thing are just incredible. But this really was the turning point for the Beatles, because obviously Hard Day's Night, Help, great stuff. But, it was still kind of like they were one of the better bands, right? And they were still at the top of the game, but would you go to say that they're one of the all-time greats? Yes, but this album made them the greatest band of all time, and then of course we see their output later on, which is just unparalleled. But I mean, this album has so many great songs. I mean, Norwegian Wood, which has some of Lennon's best lyrics, some of his most funniest, some of his most disturbing, but it's the first use of a sitar in popular music, because George Harrison was really getting into Indian music. and Ravi Shankar, which, he later became really great friends with. And so this was really such a turning point in music, because they took kind of what the Byrds were doing with folk rock and obviously brought it to a way higher level. Because I mean, there's not even competition between the Byrds and the Beatles. But they really elevated to a new level. They took their songwriting, it got more introspective, it got more clever. It was more than just like, yeah, I'm in love with this girl and she loves me, that sort of stuff. And then You Won't See Me. I mean, really, John and Paul are firing off on all cylinders here. Obviously, Nowhere Man, another one of their best songs. And then, of course, you have the two companion pieces, Michelle, which Paul put on with the French lyrics. And then you have, I would argue, the even better Girl, which I think is one of Lennon's best songs lyrically, and just an incredible piece of music. The chord progressions on these songs really make the Beatles stand out, because nobody was making songs this creative and this memorable. And then, of course, you have like songs like I'm Looking Through You, Wait, The Word. But I will say, even so, they're firing off on all cylinders. But George Harrison has some really great contribution to this album, especially with Think for Yourself, which has some really amazing lyrics, especially for the time. Like who uses the word opaque, in a song at that time in 1965? Maybe Dylan, but not really anybody else. And If I Needed Someone, which is just, you hear that song and it really sounds like the definition of like hippie music, like, and that's not a bad thing. It just really sounds like this is from the 60s. It could come from no other time period. But I think this album has such a unified sound to it. And of course, how can I not talk about, because I really do think, despite, Paul having all these great songs, John Lennon has all the best songs on this album in particular, and especially In My Life, which is, I mean, I just get chills talking about that song, because it just, John looking back at his life and all the people that have come in and out, there are places I remember, all, what's the line where it's like, some have gone and some remain, it's just so beautiful. It's such a beautiful tribute to the way life goes on, and to the people who have populated, either good or bad. It's just really such a beautiful, beautiful, poignant song. And this is like really, as I said, the turning point of psychedelia and folk rock. I mean, really, this was when everything changed.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I already got my Beatles fanboy rant out of the way, but I would definitely agree that this is definitely like the turning point in the Beatles' career, sort of. Like, there's a quote here from someone who works for Pitchfork that said this was like the shift away from Beatlemania towards like their more introspective adult subject matter. And I would agree with that. Like, definitely from what I know about their earlier and later albums, definitely a very important point in their career and in the subject of music in general, I'd say.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. I mean, really, I think this is the perfect gap between those, because it has those really catchy hooks. And not to say that they didn't later, obviously they did, but I think it really does kind of feel like their early stuff, but also their later stuff. So it really is it's such a perfect amalgamation, because Help, obviously you have songs like Yesterday, which was kind of like going in, kind of pointing to that direction, which they'd later go in. But I think this is like the absolute bridge. And it really, it just feels so definitive in its sound and in its execution. I mean, this is where I'd probably have it on my list of all time. So I think this is at a perfect spot at number 28. Absolutely deserving to be this high on the list. I mean, it's the Beatles,
Yeah.
And this is only their second album on the list that we've seen so far. But yeah, so now at number 27, we have one that I really am going to get into, and that's Inner Visions by Stevie Wonder. Now, I was saying this before in the last episode about how many times I don't give out like incredibly high scores, especially 10 out of 10s. This is one of the 4 albums that I'd give a 10 out of 10 to. This is a perfect album. All the songs on it are so masterfully done. And yet again, and we're talking about turning points in artist career. I mean, this, and yet again, the first Stevie Wonder album to make the list. So, it goes to show, how brilliant Stevie Wonder is. But yeah, this is the thing with this album, because obviously he came out with Talking Book just a year before this, and he really made that shift, because the thing with Stevie Wonder is he had hits in the 60s, right? And especially when he was like 11, when, he's known as Little Stevie Wonder. But he wasn't really an artist, right? He just had some great hits. And he was one of the best vocalists ever, obviously. Everybody knew that. Prodigy in his own right. But, he wasn't, he really felt like by the late 60s, especially 1969, he was actually just talking about this in, I don't know if you saw the documentary Questlove came out with, The Summer of Soul. It's on Hulu. It's really good if you want to check it out. But basically, he was talking about at that point in time, he was feeling like, yeah, this is good and all, but like, I want to be saying something. Like, this is not what I want to be doing. And so when Marvin Gaye came out with What's Going On, obviously transformed everything around Motown and showed that socially conscious music from Black artists could be profitable, which seemed like the only thing Berry Gordy cared about at that moment in time. And so when he renewed his contract, when he was only 21 years old, keep in mind, they gave him complete creative control to do whatever he wants. So he came out with Music of My Mind, which still had a lot of love songs, but, he brought in the Tonto synthesizer. He brought in all these different elements that weren't ever heard before, and really made these incredible compositions. I mean, besides Brian Wilson, I wouldn't say there's a better composer in contemporary music than Stevie Wonder. And I think he's an even better songwriter because his lyrics are incredible. And then he had Talking Book, which you kind of delved into political themes with Big Brother and stuff, but still a lot of love songs like You Are the Sunshine of My Life and all that. But this is where he took things to a whole other level. And I think this has some of his most underrated songs, like Visions. It has this beautiful, very, very complex guitar melody and chord progression. And I think it's one of his most underlooked and one of his best songs. Because I heard this album for the first time right after George Floyd happened, right? That whole thing, and everything. This album, it struck a chord with me so much because it really summarized everything I was thinking. It was everything kind of articulated through this music. And this album came out in 1973, which is saying a lot. But Living for the City, man, is one of the greatest political statements ever made by any artist. And yet again, another song that's so, it's such a magnum opus in its execution. Obviously, you have the skit with the black man going to New York City and getting arrested by the police. And it's just something that is just so powerful. And of course, I mean, the layers of his vocal harmonies are so incredible. It feels so precise. And then at the end of the song where he's just scowling, because you could just tell how mad he is about all the injustices that are happening. This is a crazy thing about Stevie Wonder is how well he's able to tap into everything that's happening around us, even though he can't see. But in some way he sees better than anybody who actually has vision. And yeah,
wow, that's deep.
Dude, it really is though. I mean, that's the thing with him. And especially, not to get too off track here, because I'm kind of jumping all over the place with this album, but the opening track, Too High, is like, to that point, the darkest song Stevie Wonder had ever made. And so that immediately, when you start listening to this album, you're like, okay, this is like, he's really getting into something here that really has never really been tapped on before, at least for him. But then, of course, you have iconic songs like one of my favorite Stevie Wonder songs, personal favorite off this album, Golden Lady, which I think is one of his best love songs, one of the best songs ever. And just the chord progression on it is just mind-blowing how good it is. The way he's able to kind of modulate between these chords seamlessly and still make it so catchy. Like that, to me, is like one of the hardest things to do. But of course, you have a Higher Ground, which everyone knows, it's just one of the funkiest song about reincarnation, that's ever been made. And of course, everybody knows "Don't You Worry About a Thing," which is, just that Latin flavor to the song, and him kind of talking in Spanish, trying to impress the girl or whatever. But really, a lot of dark lyrics underneath that I think a lot of people forget about, how dark that song really is. And of course, I mean, just from top to bottom, there's not a weak track on here. Every song is great. It's one of the most cohesive albums of all time. Every song just flows right into the next. It really is like one of the greatest masterpieces in music, and honestly deserves to be way higher. Like 27 is too low. I'll be honest.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I can't really speak much to this. I haven't listened to much Stevie Wonder, which I know it's a travesty, especially
A little
considering
bit.
how important he is. But I will say that I definitely do recognize the major significance he has, and he is 100% on my list of things that I need to listen to.
Dude, put him right at the top, man. Because
All right.
I'll say this: he is, to me, he is the only artist who's on the level of the Beatles. I mean,
Okay.
like no one, especially when it comes to musical innovation. I mean, this man basically invented contemporary R&B.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just crazy to think, like, where would music be without Stevie Wonder?
Right.
And the fact that he's still around and he's still making music, he's still active, it's just so inspiring to me, and just an incredible human being. I mean, you were talking about Bowie, but this guy, I mean, he is just literally, his music, it isn't really about making money, just to get music out there. He is giving you his soul. He makes music to enrich the lives of others, to make people happy. And I think his humility on everything, it just proves to me even more so, like, that some of the greatest geniuses are the ones who really don't hold themselves in high regard, and really truly make the best music, because they're not they're not going at it for the clout. They just want to give you how they feel, and share their message with the world. So Intervisions, yeah, I wish this was even a little bit higher, but I will take it at number 27. But yeah, so Harrison, got one more left here. So what are you expecting so far? Like, what have you been thinking of this episode?
What have I thought so far?
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of these have been kind of eye-opening. But for the most part, I don't know. I think it's a solid selection. Going by the whole, the stuff I haven't listened to yet, I still recognize the significance of, and the stuff I have listened to that's been on this list, I've been like, yeah, that makes sense for the most part. I'd probably move some things around, but overall, I think it's pretty solid.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think at this point, I can't argue much of many of the picks up here, because really, as I said earlier, like, this is all-time classic territory. There's no
Right,
denying
yeah.
that whatsoever. So
And
with
it's
that,
interesting to me, sorry to interrupt you, but
no, it's
it's
fine.
interesting to me to see how many of these come from like the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
Like going back to what you said about classic territory, it's like there really was something special about that era for music, I think.
I don't think that there's any eras that were better. I think it was the most transformative. It was the most creative.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's so much that they did back then that I don't think there isn't going to be ever that much amount of innovation again, because it's like, where can music go at this point? I mean, the Beatles, Stevie Wonder, Dylan, like, they took it to a whole other level. And I
Right.
don't think, anybody's, and Pink Floyd as well. I don't think
Yeah.
anybody's ever going to be able to figure out exactly how to tap into that again, because
Hmm.
all the groundwork had already been laid. It's already
Yeah.
been laid. So
It's an interesting thought. And I was thinking that when I was watching the movie yesterday, I was like, could something like the Beatles happen again today? And
no.
I don't know. I don't think so. But
And I mean,
it's an interesting thing to think about where
right.
music can go.
And especially culturally too. I mean, not even musically, just the cultural icons that the Beatles still are to this day. I mean, you still hear Paul and Ringo get talked about all the time. They're still out there doing their thing. So I couldn't be more happy about that. So Now we get on to the last pick of this episode. And I'll tell you, it's a great one. And at number
Can't
26,
wait.
we have Goodbye Yellow Brick Road
Oh,
by
okay.
Elton John. He had to be on the list at some point. This absolutely, I think this is honestly a good spot for this. This album is just one of the best double albums of all time, no question about it. And yet again, another one of the best artists ever. I mean, how can you knock Elton John? And obviously, I think, and I know some people even say that this is one of their favorite songs ever, but Funeral for a Friend, Love Lies Bleeding, one of the greatest opening tracks to any album. Starts off as a funeral dirge, and then it turns into a pop rock classic. I don't know how, it's a very up tempo song. It's brilliant. I mean, what a way to kick off this album. But even so, I mean, listen to the track listing on this thing. We got Candle in the Wind, which is personally my favorite Elton John song. I think it's the best song that him and Bernie Taupin ever wrote. But Benny and the Jets, the title track, Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting. I mean, and those are just the big hits on this album. This whole album, there's not a bad song on here at all. Like from top to bottom, this is just such an immaculate piece of work, because obviously there's underrated cuts like The Song Has No Title, Gray Seal, Jamaica Jerk Off, Sweet Painted Lady is one of the most underrated Elton John songs. I think it's incredible. Let's see what else we got on here. Roy Rogers, Social Disease. I mean, really, what else can I say about this album? I mean, just it's crazy how many great songs are on here, and how they're able to make something that's like over probably 90 minutes long, but make it so enjoyable from top to bottom. And really proof right there that like Elton John and Bernie Taupin are one of the greatest songwriting duos in history. And the fact that they were just kind of thrown together by the record label and kind of created this lifelong friendship that still endures to this day, I just think is so, it's an inspiring story, and Elton John, I mean, he just came out with a new album last week or so. And I'm not going to, speak on the quality of it. I haven't heard it, but I haven't heard too many great things. But and Stevie Wonder's on there. He does a song with Stevie Wonder. And so the fact that you see these legends still doing their thing today is just so inspiring to me, especially someone who wants to get into the music industry. It shows the longevity of these folks and how much they love their craft. And I think when we talk about craft, you don't get much better than Goodbye Yellow Brick Road.
Yeah, I mean, like Elton John talking about still going strong today. Like
Yeah.
he's been in commercials, he's been in movies, like it's incredible. But yeah, this is definitely, the Wikipedia says it's widely regarded as his magnum opus. I haven't listened to many of his other albums fully besides this one, but based on the songs there, I would agree with that. Like it's just amazing. It's an incredible mix of stuff. Elton John, what more can be said? He's great.
One of the best. So
Yeah.
And that concludes this episode in number 26. I mean, wow, there's so many just great albums in this episode. It's like, can you even imagine what's in the next one?
I can't wait to see. I'm really curious about the top 15 in particular.
Right.
I
Yeah.
wonder if there'll be any surprises.
Maybe. I
Okay.
won't say.
Yeah, don't spoil
Obviously.
it. Don't tell me, but
don't spoil it. But hey, Harrison, I want to thank you for coming on today. And this is a great time. I always have a great time talking about music. And yeah, so I mean, where can the good folks find you?
Well, I have a little project. It's called Porridge Co. It's a little, if you like stories, if you like we're doing a little anthology series similar to Twilight Zone, creative writing stories. We record them, we add little sound effects. It's fun. That's sort of what I've been up to lately.
Okay, well, where is that, on Spotify or where?
It's on YouTube, Spotify. We have an Instagram page. Porridge Co.
All right, yeah, I'll link that down below so you guys can check it out there. But yeah, I'm definitely excited to check it out myself, because I'm very much looking forward to it. But yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to the next installment of this series. Can't wait to find out what the top 25 are.
Dude, I can't wait to tell, because there's so much more to say. And yeah, once again, thanks for coming on here. And of course, thank you guys for checking out this video. And also don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the content we're making
Smash the
here.
like button.
Just smash it. Yeah, don't even hesitate for 1 second. But once again, thank you guys. This list has been so much fun to make, and I can't wait to keep unveiling it. So we'll see you guys in the next one.